In today's episode of Tales from My Table, I want to talk about settings. Why my Eberron setting is better than your Eberron setting. In Dungeons and Dragons, or any RPG at all, there's always a setting. Is it your setting? Is it a published setting? Is it something that is homebrewed that you pulled off of Reddit? Like, what is it? What is it about settings that are cool? They can be anything, right? They can be Star Wars settings, they can be Star Trek, they can be typical Tolkien D&D, they can be whatever. And we've seen that there's a lot of them produced. Let's talk about WotC. There are a million settings. Just a few are Dragonlance, Dark Sun, Eberron, Forgotten Realms, Planescape, Spelljammer, the cool new Ravnica one. Go check that out. Go check out the Ravnica setting. Super cool. But it's a lot of reading, right? Like, have you ever read a setting book all the way through? It's cool, but it's intense. I'd like to talk about Eberron because that's the one I'm most familiar with, and it's kind of what I run my games in. Eberron's setting is by Keith Baker. If you don't know the history of Eberron, it's actually super cool. You should look it up on the wiki. But big overview is back in I think it was 3.0 days, maybe 3.5, WotC put out a call to hey, you have a cool setting, please submit it, we'll buy it from you. And that's what happened. And it was a contest, and the winner was Keith Baker for Eberron, and it is bonkers amazing good. It's like magic punk with a strong political stuff wrapped around this interesting concept of a Cold War kind of thing that's happening. It's great. I love it. Dragon Marks and Warforged, which are these automaton things. Just all this stuff is super cool. I loved it. Let me tell you a story about what happened when I first started playing D&D. So I started D&D late compared to a lot of people, right? I started in D&D 4. And I had the Dragon Insider, D&D Insider, shoot, I don't remember the name of it. But anyway, I paid WotC money to have access to their character creator. I was scrolling through there one day and I found something called a Warforged as a race. And I was like, what the heck is that? So I ended up reading through it and I was like, what the heck is Eberron? And so I ended up Google searching and going through and blah, blah, blah. And I remember I came across this picture. Boom. And I was like, there's flying airships and robots in D&D? And I was in. So I ended up, one of the guys I worked with was in my D&D game. And I took that picture and I sent it to him. And I was like, how freaking rad is this? And his reply in the chat message thing was basically said, no offense to your current game, but I want to play there. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to have to do some homework. So I ended up going online and I bought the campaign setting book for 4E about that time. And I got it and I read it all the way through. And it was awesome. I learned so much about Eberron. It was a beautiful system. It was really interestingly written. But it was like reading the encyclopedia, right? It was hard to get through in places, and you're reading it and you're trying to put together what it was. And So what I did was I took the things that immediately hit me that I knew I'd be able to remember and hold on to, right? So there's airships with rings of elemental power circling them that let them fly. Cool, I can remember that. Warforged are these sentient robots. I can totally remember that. Dragon Marks. They were super cool, but the details were a little fuzzy. I knew I wouldn't be able to remember that off the fly, and I was like, I was a super new DM, super new. I think I'd run maybe 3 games, maybe 4 games up to that point. And I don't mean campaigns, 3 games, nights of gaming. Okay. I ended up taking a bunch of stuff that I had written for a novel that I wanted to attempt to write, right? I had like all this background information, and I was like, Eberron. Ta-da! And that's what I did. I took Eberron and I mixed it with the stuff that I had stuck in my head. So I took all of the interesting political intrigue of Eberron that was really cool and awesome, and I think if my players would have been more familiar with it or something, maybe I would have spent more time trying to learn it. But instead, I just took my political system that I had spent an uncomfortable amount of time writing, and I just put it into Eberron. And I was like, okay, so instead of these warring nations, not warring nations, but instead of these nations that had these political ties, I made 5 great houses. And I put each of the great houses in charge of something. Some other things that I found that were really cool is I loved the idea of the Master of Blades from Eberron. And this like super powerful warforged that had started to create this like cult around him of other warforged. But I also wanted it to be a little something different. So I ended up making Warforged basically in my game non-sentient machines. They can think, but they're not exactly true sentient, except for 1 in 500. And 1 in 500 had a error, a bug in their system that lets them attain sentience. And so now there's more backstory to any Warforged class that someone picks, that they actually meet in a sentient. And it also gives a reason why most people maybe have never met a sentient Warforged. And so all of a sudden now, when someone shows up and they're an actual real Warforged that has a personality and a mind of their own and all these kind of things, people are like, you're just programmed well. I still don't trust you. You must be owned by somebody. And I give a great reason for these sentient Warforged to be like, well, screw all these meat bags. I'm going to go over here to the Master of Blades who believes that I'm a person. Being? Person? You know what I mean. I just thought it was a cool, like, tweak that I could do to make it interesting. More interesting. No, more interesting for me, right? And my players. One of the other major changes I made was in Eberron, necromancy isn't really looked down upon in the same way it is in other books. And although that was cool, I hate resurrection spells. Like, hate them. But that's probably for another video. We'll talk about it then. But for now, I want to point. So what I did was I made necromancy the greatest of all sins in this world. I made 2 big deities, Cardis and Marfa. Marfa is the goddess of creation, and Cardis is the god of death. And from these 2 deities, all other deities exist, and they are on one side or the other. Because of this, people consider messing with the 2 natural states of being, life and death, being greatly wrong. Even healing is like, okay, we understand, go ahead and do it, but it's a little weird. And then real necromancy, like bringing someone back to life, even if it's like a true resurrection spell, is like, whoa, you crossed the line, man. That's wrong. That's horrible. And if you're like a true necromancer and you're bringing back like zombies from the dead to like go and do your bidding, the whole world is against you. Like, it's awful. And I did it for a couple reasons. One, I didn't want people to be able to like cast Revivify and True Resurrection and all that kind of stuff. Like, I didn't want that. I mean, if they want to go and like search out and find someone from this dark, horrible alley that like might connect them to something, and might have to like be a huge alignment altering thing of like, are they going to do it or not? Okay, cool, we'll do that. But like every Tom, Dick, and Harry being able to cast Resurrection, no, not my thing. So it ended up becoming this really interesting thing though, because I remember when I did this and I explained this to my players. one of the players is like, hey, one of my spells says necromancy on it. It's a necromantic spell school. And he's like, can I cast this? And I hadn't even thought of that. Like, literally hadn't even crossed my mind. And then I was like, can, but anyone that sees it is going to be able to tell that's necromantic magic, and they're really not going to like it. It's maybe not against the law, but not good. And that opened up like a whole new line of thinking of what spells are they going to take? Are they going to make the call of like, I'm going to cast this spell even though it's illegal? I don't know. It was interesting. It was a fun tweak to the setting that I did. The other thing that I did in my setting was I had started this campaign originally with my group of friends in the Forgotten Realms. Like, probably the most quintessentially D&D setting of all time. And there are some things in Forgotten Realms that are great. I love Waterdeep. I think Waterdeep is the coolest city ever. And I love Neverwinter and Icewind Dale and all these other great pieces, these set pieces of the Forgotten Realms that I think are rad. And I like the gods of Greyhawk. And I just like all of these pieces from other settings. I just kind of stuck them all together. Instead of making a huge deal about setting, instead of forcing my players to read the encyclopedia that is Setting o' Verk, I wanted them to just do it. Like, just come play. Learn as we play. Let's do it together. Because of that, I feel like my players have a very comfortable game. I'm not trying to speak for them and say, oh, Verk's the best DM ever, because really I'm not, God knows. But I don't try to put a lot on them. I want them to know how to create their characters, and I want them to know how to play the game, the basic rules of how D&D works. But I'm not going to make them invest all these hours into learning a setting. At least my idea on it. I think other game systems that you play may be more closely bound to setting, but I feel like most of those, if you're going to play that, you're playing that for that reason, right? Like, you're picking up Fantasy Flight's Star Wars game, Edge of the Empire, or any of their variants, and you know you're going to Star Wars. Everyone at your table is going to know Star Wars, and you don't have to explain the setting of Star Wars, right? So it's whatever. But if you're playing a more generic system, or a system that isn't so closely tied to settings, I think setting is up in the air. Have fun with it. Do whatever. You want to have a homebrew, whatever, flying airships and underground sea monsters and whatever you want, go for it. Have fun. Build it. But maybe you're not like that. Maybe you're not the super creative person and you feel like, oh, I can't think of something out of the ordinary. I just want it like to be on paper for me. Do a little bit of research. Look on YouTube and Google and Wikipedia and find a setting that may spark your interest. And then read that setting book. I mean, like I said, sometimes they're a little hard, a little encyclopedic kind of feel to them. But at the very least, they'll open up your mind to all of these new options and ideas that you might want to try. So go out there, check it out, find what you have, and if you find it and it's awesome, run it. Do the deal. And here's a super cool part. Your setting doesn't have to be my setting. Your setting doesn't have to be the box standard version of whatever it is. So if you're playing with a bunch of people and they are all Forgotten Realms savants, they know everything about Forgotten Realms. And there's some things you really like about Forgotten Realms, but there's others you don't know or you feel like you haven't read enough or whatever. It's fine. Sit down at the table, say, we're going to play Forgotten Realms, but we're going to play my version of Forgotten Realms. So anything that you think you know, you don't. most people are going to be cool with that. That gives you the power of making stuff up on the fly. It gives you the ability to not feel like there's all this pressure on you to be the perfect DM, because there is no such thing. There's no such thing as the perfect DM. At the beginning of this video, I said, my Eberron setting is better than your Eberron setting. And that's true. But your Eberron setting is better than my Eberron setting. For you. So I think that's all I have to say about that. I would love to hear your guys' opinion. Tell me, what do you guys think about settings? Are settings something that you feel strictly confined to and connected to, and like it's the Bible of your world and it's going to be word for word what it was? Or are you more like it's a loose suggestion? Or is there something else you feel? Anyway, let me know down in the comments. If you like this content, please like and subscribe and all that stuff. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys all for watching, and see you all soon.